Um,
Okay, so today is what is today? The September 8th Aspirational Healthcare Advisors Group meeting. And today we're going to follow up from a meeting that happened a couple weeks ago where Lee Lewis, Heidi Cottle, and Allison Johnson shared an incredible easy button that they've been working on to help innovative consultants create self-funded plans with some of the most amazing elements anywhere in the country and really bring it to the downstream to the mid-market, to the employers down as small as 50 or 100 employees, depending on where your state is. So today, what I'd like to do is, Lee, I know you had a lot more you wanted to share from the last meeting, and we only got to just talk about a few of the toys. And I've been looking at all the toys that are in this. Is like, I want to spend some time today letting you and maybe Heidi talk about these other toys, because there's some pretty cool things. But maybe we do a quick overview so that anyone that wasn't on that first call or maybe didn't get a chance to watch the recording just does a quick 5-minute summary of this amazing easy button, and then let's get into the toys. And then I know people have got questions. I've got questions, but who would like to do that? Heidi or Lee? Which one?
Heidi, if you want to maybe do a overview on the concept of how it fits together to make it easier for the smaller employers and how it connects in particular to stop loss, I could then lead into the conversation around the individual pieces that go into the super build.
certainly. Yeah. So, just real quickly, can everybody see my screen? I just had a little blip
Yes,
on
you're
my
coming
iPad.
through. Yep, you're coming through fine.
Okay. So, Lee, why don't you kind of explain kind of the best practice, and then I'll lead into kind of the
Okay.
stop loss side. How does that sound?
That's perfect. So, as we all know, there are some real advantages that large employers are able to capture that are often out of the reach of smaller employers. I've learned this through my career because I work for a co-op that does advisement for some of the largest employers in the world. The logos there on the right are all employers who are co-owners or joint owners of the Health Transformation Alliance, where I have the opportunity to serve as the Chief Strategy Officer. And in my role, I'm reached out to, I think, 7 million times a day by Point Solutions. That may be over under the actual number, but it's overwhelming. And I'm able to sort from that down to some really exciting capabilities. Many of those that are most interesting and have the biggest impact, unfortunately, have very large minimum sizes. It's not uncommon for me to interact with a vendor that can save tens of millions of dollars to our employers, or in percentage terms, 1, 2, 3% or more, but they have a minimum lives requirement of 10, 15, 20,000 people. And if you're a 40 life company, that's never going to happen for you in a million years. And we get some great results through that. I have a number of friends and mentors and other colleagues who have given me all kinds of amazing advice and input over time, and with whom I collaborate. Heidi's one of those people who is always on the leading edge. And I had the opportunity to speak with her a little while ago, and she said, well, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could find some ways to make some of these solutions accessible at a lower lives count? We're operating in innovation all the time. We're learning all kinds of new capabilities. Is there a way that we could solve that problem? And we started brainstorming on it. The three challenges, of course, are you've got to find a way to streamline data, because it can take just as long to set up a data feed for a 40 life group as a 40,000 life group. In some cases, paradoxically, it's even easier to get data for a small group than a large one, because there's more scrutiny and there's more information and more sample size in a large group's file. The second thing is that the legal and contracting and sales process can be just as long for a small company as a big one. And so we'd want to adjust that. And then the third area is around finances, of sort of establishing the financial connections between a vendor and the employer's bank. It doesn't take much longer to do that for a Fortune 100 as a 100-life employer. And so these were the items that we had to tackle. And in working with Heidi, we've found a model to be able to successfully do that. And that is effectively, we connect three pieces. We can connect through, in theory, any TPA. We can simply connect that TPA's data into a data hub. We can connect the data hub into solutions that are able to provide value to our employees. And then those solutions connect to a billing hub, and the billing hub sends all the invoices in a single channel back through to the administrator. Now, the administrator, because we're transmitting these bills in the form of an 837 file, the payments can be auto-adjudicated, whether they are payments to a doctor, which is normally how a medical claim works. But as long as it's an ERISA approved expense, you can run any kind of invoice through an 837 file. You can pay any type of ERISA approved expense through that, including, as we've learned, subclinical services and even administrative services. It's sort of like you can now use a telephone line to send an image through a fax, or you can use dial-up internet, or you can send a payment through PayPal. Telephone lines were never invented for all of that. They were invented just to carry voice, but we have cleverly found other ways to use the same frequency to send all kinds of different types of information and services. That's a little bit of what we're exploring here, is that by using a billing hub, we can certainly auto-adjudicate the payments of medical services, but we're now doing it for clinical, subclinical services, and we're doing it for administrative fees too, which puts all of the spend in one place. It streamlines all of the reporting and allows you to look up how much you spent on a back surgery and look up how much you spent on a diabetes program or a nurse navigator, all within the claims feed. And this has major implications as well for how it impacts stop loss insurance, which is incredibly important in this space. And Heidi will share a little about that.
Thanks, Lee.
Great. So before we take questions, let me just kind of finish out what kind of the value proposition is here for the mid-market. And I'm going to kind of get to the tactical level of some of the build kind of in this illustration. One of the biggest challenges that we find in the mid-market, in the last stat I saw, it was pre-COVID, but I haven't seen an updated one, was that 82% of the employers in the United States are mid-market, which is anything from 50 lives to 10,000 lives. And so it's a very expansive market. So what we were trying to solve for was, how do we make this really simple? How do we take what is in the fully insured type of framework and the chassis and deconstruct it, but then reconstruct it in such a way that it's easy for the employer to understand, it's easy for the broker to be able to communicate, and there's kind of an ease of use for the member as well. So how we did this is that in reconstructing everything, we basically put it, and I'm going to talk more to this side of the equation, is that we did limit, number one, the TPA. So we've selected a TPA to do that. And we'll talk about that just briefly in a moment. But then through the use of what Lee has articulated extremely well about these, what we're calling the super build, is that we've developed a separate instance of that super build that we can then access for the mid-market employers. And what that allows is that what we found and we continue to find in the mid-market, if we try to negotiate with point solutions, there's a lot of PMs in there, PMs. And by the time you aggregate all of those PEPMs with the fixed cost, it's more expensive than going out to the fully insured market. And so by using and leveraging what Lee has explained, we're able to not have PEPMs in there. We basically then are paying via the claim processing side of this, so that mid-market employer can get access to all of those high-performing providers within the super build, but they pay for it on a per transaction basis or a per access basis rather than the PEPMs. So what that does is it reduces the cost of the fixed costs under this program. And it also allows that access to a lot of providers that some of these providers over on this side that are point solutions do not allow. I mean, they don't even talk to employers under 2,000 lives. So you get better quality, better access, and it's more affordable. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, part of the reason why stop loss is so critical here, we could not build this under a fully insured environment because we would be subject to MEWA laws. Okay. So being self-funded and the fact that every individual employer has their own contract, but because under captive laws, we are able to aggregate those small employers so they're not at risk for, you know, a shock claim in a year, that it's somewhat normalized under that captive because we're under an aggregation for that pooled risk. And so a great advantage by being able to do that. But what we've also done is we've kind of exercised the lever and the value of all of these high performance providers, in that the stop loss is giving us the ability to extend that lever for advance credits, meaning that we don't have to wait for the performance of those high performance providers to actually get some credit. So we actually have between, and we have a couple of stop loss providers, but we actually have about 10 to 15% of a cost reduction by being able to have all of this super build in basically the underwriting of stop loss. So there's a couple of additional advantages, and then I'll pause, have you guys ask questions, and we can move on. But part of also doing it kind of in this framework is that one of the biggest challenges with point solutions is the fact that we can't get data. So we're not able to validate the performance of these point solutions. So by the sheer fact that all of these are under an 837 file, we're now able to, through our advanced data analytics, we're able to then monitor the performance of these providers, because we're able to monitor actually through the actual use in the utilization side. So what that also does is, yes, we're then able to bring some cost accountability, some quality accountability to the equation. But the most important thing is that because it is a claim, it's also protected by stop loss. And so, you know, the individual employer, if they have a small individual stop loss at 20,000 or at 30,000, that even those dollars that are going through specifically for this super build is also then within that bundle and protected by stop loss. Okay, that protects for COBRA continuation or state continuation, etc. So we've truly, in this super build, based on, and I know Lee's much younger than I am, that in the years, 40 plus years that I've been in the industry, that being able to look at this and build it with that lens of, how do we protect the employer? How do we protect the employee? How do we bring cost efficiencies? And so we truly try to use that thought leadership to bring a comprehensive package. So let me pause. Any questions?
Yeah, let's open it up. I've got a bunch of questions, but I really want to see, I know that having spoken to many of these advisors, they've got questions. So I'm just going to open it up and see who's got the first question.
Steve here. I've got a question. It's really basic, but just want to make sure I understood what you said.
Sure.
So yes, point solutions typically go by, PE, PM, 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 whatever. Okay. What I think I heard you say is you're converting that so that if they have 100 employees, rather than charging that group that unit cost times 100, you're only going to be doing in costs now based on utilization, so that if 10 of those employees use that service in the course of the month, the cost of the plan is 10 utilizations, which is much less than 100 times a PMPM. Is that correct?
Since Lee developed this, I'm going to let Lee answer it and then I'll augment it, what Lee says.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Lee, you're assuming that you combine all those point solutions and you're going to generate over the course of a year 15, 20, 25% savings based on the size of the captive group, and that's reflected in the stop loss.
That's correct.
Okay. You
That's
guys are
correct.
really smart. I'm telling you.
So,
One-
Heidi, are you shopping that stop loss out to all the carriers that you've negotiated that are in that pool of stop loss carriers? Is that what you're?
Yes. So let me go down a little bit here. So our partners, and part of the reason for this, and I know we as consultants or brokers like to have a lot of options, okay? But a lot of options, right? It's like, okay, I want the full menu. Unfortunately, for us right now, and so let me give you kind of a longer term perspective. We are trying to narrow the market initially for this reason, okay? That statistically, if you have too many variables, you cannot validate, nor can you then point back and say, hey, I can guarantee X amount of savings. So what we have to do initially in this pool, even though we're pooled with other captive members, is that once we're able to statistically validate this, then we can start putting those guarantees on there. Okay. So what we've done is narrowed the variability. So we've narrowed, essentially, we're using 3 captives, but what we've also understood based on the risk, and I'll share again, this is not the dumping ground for bad risk. Okay. We do a preliminary due diligence before we ever and this is through Allison's group, Benefit Dynamics, as the GA for this, that they will do a preliminary underwriting before they pass it on for final underwriting with the captives. Okay. But we also know, being in the industry, that you need to have several options. So we have several captives that we have negotiated with that will allow us this and give us access to the broadest amount of networks in the United States as well. So Skyward ICS, Trinity Health, and BevCap, and we have one other kind of sitting in the wings. So when you submit a quote, which we would encourage all of you to do, just try it out, okay? That as you're going through your RFP process, we have tried to make it streamlined. So that link, and I'll go through that as we answer questions, but that we've tried to streamline it, that yes, we will look and shop it to those captives, and whoever the most cost-effective captive is, we will go ahead and quote those. Okay. Make sense? Jeff?
Yes. And
Yes.
can I just,
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
and going
I
back to Steve's question, just to be specific, all of the point solutions then would actually identify a particular patient or family member or member
Through the eligibility.
that claim's going to process through. So
Yeah.
regardless of what it is,
Doesn't matter.
they're all going to be sending claims through this type to a person.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes. So Johnny, you had a
There-
question? Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was gonna take just a minute to brag on Heidi and make her uncomfortable. So one of the biases that I have, so I work with these groups. An example, yesterday I was not yesterday, a couple days ago, I was speaking with the CEO of one of the most powerful solutions we have, which is a specialty drug vendor that puts a team on managing every specialty drug patient, both on the medical and pharmacy. And I think their minimum client size is 5,000 lives. And it saves gangbusters dollars and gets, in fact, better service and better health outcomes for the members. It also makes the most expensive therapies in the world free to the members. So there's a wonderful social determinant of health improvement there as well, because a lot of people can't afford really expensive drugs like chemotherapy. And I was speaking to him about this, and he said, Lee, the big problem that we've always had, in addition to all the operational challenges of adding a small group, is that even if if a small group, say there's a 30 or 40 life employer, maybe they've got a stop loss with $40,000 spec or $50,000 spec. He said, if we take a $400,000 drug and get it down to $50,000, all we have done is save the stop loss $350,000 because the employer will see no benefit. And so we've never even thought of selling to a small employer because the only one who benefits is the stop loss. And that's not going to affect your stop loss at all in the short term and may not in the long term, because your best chance is maybe get a small decrement at renewal or a discount at renewal. And who knows if that's going to come through, but the yield loss would be incredibly high. And with what Heidi has come up with here of converting all of these programs into claims-based formats that are acknowledged, recognized, and treated as part of the total episode of care by the stop loss vendor, we're enabling it so that a 25 life group who just saved $100,000 or $200,000 on a specialty drug is going to immediately get benefit from that. And in fact, none of the savings go to the stop loss vendor. 100% of those are reclaimed for the employers, which is pretty neat.
Pretty cool.
That's great.
Good job.
So Heidi, how did you do that?
How did I do that?
Is that a secret?
No, it's not. It's just understanding and looking at it through a different lens. Okay, meaning that when you're in a participating contract, stop loss contract, that those savings get credited back to the pool. And so rather than, a rebate type of program, you're essentially in your own stop loss. It's kind of more or less what I would consider a premium stabilization.
Yeah.
Okay, that you can stabilize your premiums then in this pool over time because you're in, again, a broader pool and those are participating employers in the pool.
Right. Well, thank you.
So what other questions does anybody have right off the bat before I really want Lee to go through some of these other, and I've got some specific questions, but there's a lot packaged in this Theralta. And but I want to give the advisors a chance to just ask questions that they have.
Well,
I'd
I've got a question, and it's at the 10,000 level view, foot view. I just want to clarify my understanding. This feels like the chassis of a non-plan MIWA, as in each of these participants have their own self-funded plan, but there seems to be an unofficial, and they're not commingling their assets between plans, so they all act as plan sponsor at the end of the day. But there's this almost this unofficial captive component that's bringing it all together for the purpose of negotiating with these vendors that won't touch the small guy. so that we do have access to those vendors. But it's not technically a non-planned MIWA chassis. These are all truly captive self-funded plans. It just
Yes.
kind of feels like a non-planned
No.
MIWA chassis.
No, because what DOL came out, and happy to send you the private letter ruling, but the stop loss is not insurance. Okay, it's protection. And because all of these plans are ERISA qualified federal plans, and they're self-funded, but they're individually handled. They're only aggregated for stop loss, which the captive allows you to aggregate for stop loss. So we do not penetrate the MIWA law ever, because they all have individual contracts with the third-party administrator. We're just streamlining what you have access to, rather than, okay, I've got a now contract with this point solution. I now have contract here, here, and here. We've just streamlined the processes in how we have architected this to build it back up again, but they're individual contracts. 100% individual contracts.
That helps me understand it a little bit. I guess then my one follow-up question is on a slightly different topic, but you know, any agent across the entire nation is going to have their favorite point solutions that they feel are really, really good. But it sounds like this is not plug and play. This is not, hey, let me throw in my point solution for my groups. This is, you're going to use these point solutions and this TPA and this PBM and a choice of these stop loss. I'm not saying that negatively. I just want to make sure I understand that.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah. Now I'm going to tell you, because Lee kind of pierced that veil of what is the art of the possible here. Okay. That our objective initially, as I stated, is we narrowed the variability so we can have some evidence-based stats to follow, right? Primary objective. To say this can work and this can be replicated, is that if someone truly wants to take this whole architecture and put it under a separate TPA, et cetera, that is an option of doing so. Okay. But you've got to have about, 40 years of experience if you want to recreate what we just did. So,
well,
just saying.
And your ability to share the data at
Yes,
a very low cost on a monthly basis makes it very simple to bring in other point solutions if you really wanted to.
Well, so Daryl, not saying that we won't evaluate other point solutions, but it's almost, okay, think about this, because recognize with all these new transparency rules, there is now fiduciary responsibility, a broader level of fiduciary responsibility for the plan sponsors.
Right.
Okay. And so in being able to prove, evidence-based outcomes and be able to say we're monitoring it on this basis helps support an employer, especially a smaller employer with 100 lives or 200 lives, to be able to say, I've got a process of evaluation. Okay. That's the whole thing with, as we look at fiduciary risk under retirement plans, is I have an evaluation process by which I follow. Okay. So we're establishing all of those fiduciary guidelines underneath this super build framework, such that, Johnny, if you said, hey, would really love to have this be evaluated as an option to put into the super build, that's certainly a possibility. Okay. And we don't necessarily, so it's almost like, not that we have established this fully, but it's almost like putting, one of these point solutions on notice and saying, hey, you're on the watch list. You're not performing. Okay. We're going to, plug and place something else in here, because how we've architected that, we have done it in such a way it is easy to plug and play. But we want to make sure that we follow some of those guidelines in, okay, does this make sense to move it? Does the data support it? And having all that data analytics is critical to that evaluation.
Right.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think the only point solution on here that I'm noticing is it's called Oriant. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're pretty great. So
Yeah.
We're working on that.
I said that tongue in cheek. So sorry to
No, we're working on that.
play a little bit.
We're working
All right.
on it.
Thank
Yeah.
you for answering my questions.
This is
Yeah.
Steve. I would like to comment on another solution you've got here. and that is Ventegra.
Mhm.
And I don't know of any organization, any leader of an organization who is more, and I'll use the word pure, when it comes to altruistic goals and building a strong organization, but really being driven by the basic ethic of healthcare than Ventegra. And I've used them. And if you've got the same kind of quality going across your other picks, that's pretty neat.
Well,
Thanks,
there's
Stephen. And why don't we
innovators.
let that be an introduction to Lee? Why don't you talk about, I mean, there's a lot of point solutions in here. And
Yeah.
I would like you to start with just explaining a little bit about Right Way, because they're playing a very important role here as the navigator. And I'm assuming that they're going to play a very critical role at making sure that various point solutions get brought in when they're needed. But talk a little bit about Right Way's role here.
Yeah. In fact, actually, Heidi's a little more close with them and the way they integrate, and then I'll fill in the blanks around how it begins to connect from the hub into the spokes.
Okay, so one of the challenges we have in since managed care is that we've really lost the ability to have a quarterback of healthcare. And that used to be the primary care doc. That's not the case anymore. So we're trying to reestablish it with a little bit more innovative, but still getting to the right care, right time, right provider. And that's the clinical care navigator through Right Way. So Right Way basically, they're clinically trained, but what they do is they also are aware of what the plan design is for in and out of network. And so it becomes a concierge level service provider for employees. So if they say, hey, look, I don't know where to go. I don't know, how our health plan works or whatever the case may be. So what we try to do in this process is put that clinical care navigator as the key, and I hate using gatekeeper, but the key advisor to the employees to be able to help them navigate through the system and get to the right point solutions. And we do that through a couple of means. Number one, we have obviously that they're clinically based. And number two is that we have incentives in the plan designs that if you use the clinical care navigation, which is under this tier 1, so it becomes a value-based benefit design, that we incent people to go that direction. If they go that direction, it saves them, the plan, and everybody money, and they get better quality of care. So that's essentially the role of the care navigator. Daryl is.
And how do they integrate with all these different DPCs that are part of the DPC network? Because
They
again,
actually.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Just that the DPC is expected to play a little bit of that kind of coordination role and kind of make sure that they're helping to support their member. How does the integration work between the DPC and Right Way?
Okay, so what Right Way does is through the SNS portal, and they have their digital channel, etc. They have access to who all of the providers are. Okay, and so what they'll do is in that instance, they're going to guide people as appropriately as possible into that that framework of tier 1. Okay, if it's prudent. And so from the clinical care navigation, they'll know the plan designs, they'll be trained. There is going to be, and again, this is based on how quickly we go to size,
Right.
that they've committed that they'll have kind of a team of clinical care navigators that are specific to this build that will then know the groups essentially very well and know exactly what to do, even within the groups of the captive.
And I would think that in most cases, it'll be the DPC on behalf of the member reaching out to Right Way. Is that
Exactly.
correct? Have I got that right?
It will be a soft transfer to the DPC provider.
Okay.
Okay. So not that we are trying to do everything we can to integrate this, not that it's going to be perfect and no system's exact, but that's the intent and that's the commitment that they've made.
And they'll play any kind of pre-authorization that might be needed as they integrate with the DPC.
They'll make sure that they get to the right person to help get any advanced type of procedure done. Obviously, emergency situation, you go wherever you need to go.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Awesome. So let's jump into some of the other ones. Lee, do you want to talk about some of the other, or you want to add on to the right way, or
Yes.
just talk about some of the other Peralta solutions?
Absolutely. I want to add to that and also explain a little bit about some of these capabilities. One change that we're trying to make here as well is that oftentimes people talk about, oh, we need to have a quarterback, right? Someone who is able to look across the field, see the things that are available, and gets that patient and gets them to the right place. And that has been common dialogue across, certainly across the large employers with whom I work and others. But what we realized as we've been working on this is that we've got the wrong sport. We don't need a quarterback on an American football team. The sport we want to be playing is basketball. We need someone to throw the ball in after a hoop's just been made. But at that point, we want all the pieces of the puzzle to pass amongst each other in order for us to get the right outcome. And so while we're working to train in right way to be that first player to toss the ball in from the sideline, once our member is out and with a solution and getting services, our intention is to train each service on each other so that they can then work to get the right services for the patient. And of course, advanced primary care is going to be critical in that because they're going to be as or more important even than a navigation service that might exist through the call center.
Right.
So now let's talk about some toys. This is my favorite part.
Can I just throw
Please.
a plug in? You've done
Please.
exactly what the NUCA design does. They too found that if everything went through a quarterback, it was not efficient. But they took the same basketball analogy to have everybody working together to maximize efficiency. So well done.
Oh, that's good
relative
to
to
hear.
what NUCA's done.
That's great to hear. So now there's a couple of things that existed that exist that are being used at the large employer level that, as I've worked with Heidi, we've been able to identify, hey, these are some major enhancements that I may not have realized at first how big they were, but will be significant enhancements. The first one is just the two pieces of plumbing that we're adding. The first is the concept of a data hub. So surprisingly, even among large employers, it is still, as I mentioned earlier, it's challenging to get your data, but they definitely always get it. What I've come to learn is that it's actually quite rare for a smaller employer who's using a large network to ever get their data or to access it almost ever. And something that we looked at here is one of my Fortune, I think they're a Fortune 30. It's a large media company. They have 300,000 lives. They have 2 data warehouses and they have their own data servers with all their claims data are on them. And they started working with this tool that allows them to set up an API and move their data from one point of stasis to another across all of their vendors and across all of the work that they're doing. Essentially, they can set up their own data feeds and do not have to ask a carrier for permission. They're able to access all of their data on a direct API. And as we began working on this, we realized that in order to make it just as easy to implement a 300,000 life group as it is to implement a 30 life group from 30 life group 1,000 times or 10,000 times, the only way we were going to accomplish that is by having a data hub. But as a very happy consequence, once you have a data hub in place that is necessary to enable the super build, you now have a data hub in place for anything else. So if you have another vendor that you want to use and send data to them, guess what? The same architecture that exists here, that's going to work for your telemedicine company. That'll work for your second opinion company. That can get your data over to Orient. That can get your data over to Teladoc. Any other type of solution that you might be using, if you want to perform an analysis, you now, just because we had to install it, you now have access to potentially the most powerful software in the country that is being used by the Fortune 30 to be able to move your data even for a 30, 40, or 50 life group anywhere it needs to go. And you can set up a data feed in weeks versus waiting years and never getting it. So that's the first very happy consequence. It's like that scene in The Dark Knight where Lucius says they were trying to build bridges, and in order to build a bridge, they made this great big monster vehicle that could jump across rivers. And they said, the bridges worked kind of fine, or maybe not so great, but the tumbler worked just fine, and they converted it into a Batmobile. That's a little bit of what we're doing here. Is in order to make these bridges work, we had to build a Batmobile. And yeah, you can use it for anything you want.
Cool.
The second thing here is the billing hub. Similarly, I have a Fortune 200 employer with 16,000 lives and a Fortune 70 employer with 60,000 lives. And they both said, you know what? We want to streamline all of our accounts payable, because today they each, if you'll believe this, they each have over 30 point solutions that they're having to pay manually every month through accounts payable. So they have their claims payments and their PBM that does the pharmacy claims that are paying all of their doctors and drugs. But then for their second opinion vendor and their kidney disease vendor and their gut biome vendor and their pharmacogenomics vendor and their wellness vendors, all of those have to be paid through accounts payable. And they have two staffers whose entire job year in, year out is just to run down these invoices, validate them, and usher them through the process to make payments, most of them through the ERISA health plan budget. And they said, no, this is silliness. We've got to find a way to automate all of this. And we want to do so in such a way that we can get good reporting, because these large employers, they might spend $400 million a year on healthcare claims, but they have another $30 million a year they're spending on random point solutions. And when they need to run projections for their budget, guess what they're doing? They're getting one piece of reporting that shows $400 million, and then they have to go track down dozens of accounts payable receipts in random PDF server files and emails all across their organization, and then add them all up manually with calculators in Excel to figure out that last 30 million so they can add it back in for their budgeting. It's a nightmare. And they said, we need to automate not just how we pay them, but we want to get all our reporting in one place, because this is ridiculous. They were chasing down all these Adobe Acrobat PDFs and adding them manually to try and figure out how much we spent on our health plan. So we weren't thinking about that as the solution. We weren't trying to build a Batmobile. We were just trying to build a bridge. But in building the bridge, we had to figure out how to make a billing hub that would make it as easy to onboard one bank account for a Fortune 100 as it is to onboard 10,000 tiny bank accounts for 40 life employers. And what we came away with is a billing hub where all of our invoices go one place. It all gets converted into 837 format and then can be auto adjudicated in bulk automatically, instantly, through a TPA. And what comes out the other side is all of your reporting, everything in one simple place. And that enables Heidi's brilliance around the stop loss of being able to have all of it covered under one blanket policy with stop loss. And it makes it so that it's much easier to run ROI analyses,
Right.
because now we know how much we actually spent on diabetes. Because before we'd run diabetes in our data warehouse to see how much we spent, and then we'd have to go chasing Adobe Acrobat files through our email to try and track down what we spent on vendors. But now they're all in one place and you can run them with a few clicks.
Nice.
All made possible there. But this will enable you. Is it just for this? No. If you have another 5 vendors and you just want to be able to pay those invoices more easily, maybe it's your telemedicine or your second opinion program. Maybe it's some other drug purchasing thing, or maybe it's a nurse care navigation for imaging, whatever it might be. You now can run all those claims also through the billing hub, the same as a Fortune 100 employer might be able to do to automate that process, streamline your reporting.
Brilliant.
So now those are some awesome tools. And if that's all you got, plus some good stop loss architecture, a decent TPA, and that was it, this would all be worth it. It'd be exciting. Oh, and what did you pay for those? Nothing. You don't pay anything for those. The data feeds are all compensated. The data hub is you have to pay for the data hub, but the data hub is paid for through the transactional flow that's occurring through these vendors. The billing hub is paid through a couple percentage points, just like Visa gets paid when I go to a restaurant and I pay with my Visa card. Am I paying for Visa? Not really. A little bit. Really 3% or 2 or 1% of my meal goes to Visa for processing the transaction, and the restaurant keeps 99% or 98%. Or if you go to the DMV, they're kind of jerks about it. They'll charge me the extra 2%, right? That's just how they do things.
Right.
But it doesn't really, it's an invisible cost to the system that does not require extra budgeting or extra hassle that the vendors themselves are happy to forego in order to have all of this just work. So, but those are incredibly powerful tools, but you really don't have to pay anything extra to have them. They're just built in and will give you the same type of architecture that not just any of the largest companies, but the most progressive large companies in the country. So now let's talk about these solutions. One thing that came up earlier.
Can I ask you to start with one particular one, Lee? You know that I'm fascinated and passionate about cash pay. And I want you to talk about the TP Net and its ability to, I guess, help Rightway find best prices, even through what the fee schedules online are showing, and cash-based strategies. Can you kind of address that?
Oh, totally. This is Heidi's area, so I'll toss it to her.
Sorry, Daryl. So what essentially we've done is we've kind of taken the best practice, and also we've scraped all the machine readable files from both the hospitals and the payers. And so that data alone, candidly, is not sufficient to make true accurate assessments. But what we do is we complement that data set with as the base line of CMS proxy data, as well as then all payers claim database. Plus we bring in Quantros as quality scoring, and we're able to then triangulate and provide that information such that Rightway is able to then say, look, we have this information, this is the most cost effective, and this is where you need to go.
Nice. Perfect.
Okay.
That's all I needed to hear. Thanks.
Yeah.
Lee? Do you want to talk about any of the other, like Walrus or the dialysis program or Access Hope or Carrot? You got lots of.
Let me see if I can do this efficiently, and then we can dive deeper on any of these. So the first one I will cover is Smart Light. What happens inside of major insurance carriers is they have many types of fraud, waste, and abuse and payment integrity capabilities they're operating on the claims. They tend to be more robust on fully insured or Medicare Advantage business and much less robust for self-funded employers. Nevertheless, one of the most interesting attributes within fraud, waste, and abuse is a small niche service called the Special Investigation Unit. It's a very fancy name. You could abbreviate it the SIU. What they do is they don't look at coding violations. They don't look at anomalous claims that just sort of fly through with perhaps the wrong coding, but instead they look for large patterns of organized, calculated billing that in many cases is calibrated to get false claims through all the billing safeguards. I like to say that every carrier has a goalie, but that doesn't stop every ball from getting passed. And if you've got a kicker that intentionally is able to lie in wait on the side and isn't really visible to the goalie, they're going to have a much easier time getting the balls passed every single time if that is their planned intent. So it's a very niche area, but they oversee some of the most dramatic amounts of claims that come through and are paid incorrectly. A, because there's a lot of it, unfortunately, that occurs, and B, because it's really hard to stop a claim from getting paid incorrectly when the person on the other side of it gets to try 100 times to beat the system before they figure out how to do it, and can do trial and error 100 times, not just in a month or a week, but even in a day. They can send that many claims through and just see what the system shoots down and what the system lets through. So unfortunately, SmartLight they can't touch you. They can't work with you unless you've got over 12,000 lives. And even then it's special exception. But by aggregating everyone together, we now can get enough sample size to where they're able to see enough claims activity across a very broad spectrum and start finding these types of bad actors in those claims that the major carrier may or may not get to in the next 3 to 5 years because they move very, very slowly. Like a bank who hires a security guard, even though there is the police, yes, even though there is the FBI and the SWAT team, sure. Why is it the bank hires the security guard? Because they need more, because they have more to protect. Well, now we're going to be getting the same type of private security for the small employers that up until now has only been available to the very largest employers in the country, where you're going to have a special investigations unit, a private special investigations unit monitoring all your claims, finding bad actors and cutting them out. My favorite example of this, to give you an idea of what we will occasionally find, is there's a doctor named Dr. Padilla out of El Paso who has appeared all over the country in multiple Fortune 200, Fortune 300 employer claims in every major network. When you Google search him through Google Maps, at least it was this recently, I ran it probably 6 months ago. There is no Dr. Padilla in El Paso. It pulls up a boarded up strip center and says permanently closed. There is nobody there, but this doctor, this tin, has been billing millions and millions of dollars of claims through employers everywhere in the country.
Wow.
I personally think it might just be a front for a criminal organization or
Yeah.
something like that. El Paso, if the boot fits. So the idea there is that we find this person often in claims. The claims are coded perfectly. There's nothing wrong with the way they're coded, but they never occurred. They didn't exist. And so we shut them down. And that's one example among thousands of the kinds of providers that we'll begin screening out with your private SIU. Next, let's look at Surgery Plus. Terrific vendor. The concept is centers of excellence. Most employers would love to offer this. The benefit is simple enough. It is, if you get a surgery done, or if you have a planned surgery that you need to have, you can go to the Center of Excellence vendor, and the way it works is you don't pay anything. You, the employee, don't pay anything. And if you're willing to do it because the outcomes are so good and the cost is reasonable, the employer picks up the tab and you're able to get a no-cost surgical procedure. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can do the regular that you have right now with your 2,500 or 3,500 deductible, whatever it is. But if you're willing to go to the Center of Excellence, you're able to receive those services at no cost. Now, now Centers of Excellence have been around forever. Most of them, however, over the past 20 years have been through airfare. You have to get on an airplane. And that's been from the early days of Bridge Health out of Alaska coming to Seattle, to the Walmart Center of Excellence program that moved into and became Edison Health, and others as well. There's nothing wrong with the Center of Excellence network where you have to get on an airplane, except the fact that people just don't use it. Only about 1% of patients, unless completely forced to do so, are willing to get on an airplane and go that far away from their family, their friends, and their pastor in order to receive a major surgery. So what makes the Surgery Plus one different is that about 4 years ago, they finally cracked enough critical mass to where this is a fully drivable Center of Excellence network, that for over 80% of the population, it's drivable within a couple of hours for almost any procedure. Once a Center of Excellence network is drivable, once it's drivable, you can quintuple the number of services that you perform. This is because if you're having to fly somewhere, there's so much cost and hassle baked into it. We've already
Right.
established almost nobody will use it anyway, that you're never going to do it for something minor like a colonoscopy, not in a million years. But now that it's drivable, they're expanding to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of additional procedures that can be done, all on a low, flat, bundled, risk-capped rate. And that is making it so that they're now getting 4 and 5 and 6 times more utilization. And people are delighted to be able to use it, especially if you can't afford it. And for more than half the lives, they drive fewer than 50 miles to get to a Center of Excellence. And it is changing the way this strategy works. Normally, this is done on a high PMPM. Not for us. We negotiated 0 PMPM. If nobody uses it, nobody pays.
Nice. Awesome.
The next one on here is Walrus. Fascinating area. For those of you who are fans of Brian Klepper, he talks a lot about the concept of heart attacks and strokes and the work of Dr. Bill Besterman, who's
Yeah.
been an important thought leader in this area for a long time. When we looked at our data against the optimal therapy for heart attack survivors and stroke survivors, 92% of people are not on the right mix of 5 or so drugs, 4 or 5 drugs that they need in order to prevent the next heart attack or stroke. Worse, 20% of heart attack or stroke survivors will have another heart attack or stroke every year for their remaining lives. These people are very expensive. They're at very high risk, and they desperately need to be able to be on the right medication, because if they do, we can reduce by more than 50%, in some cases over 80%, the chance that they'll have a heart attack or stroke. So you go from 1 in 5 to 1 in 25 or better of having that follow-on heart attack or stroke. Unfortunately, though, 92% are not on the right meds, 8% are, and sometimes those on the 8% come off. What we did with Walrus is we took to them the optimal medical therapy. We worked with them to get the algorithms needed, just the search filters needed to find in the claims people who fit that bill. It's 1.5% of your people, 1.5%. And then they do outreach to the physicians with pharmacists. It's we've all seen mail order pharmacy and we've all seen telemedicine, but I, for one, have never seen a telepharmacist, but that's what they are. They're telepharmacists. They review the claims, find these high-risk patients, and then will make a call over to their doctor. And they say, "Hi, Dr. So-and-so. My name is Dr. So-and-so. I'm working on the plan. I was just double checking some of our more acute patients and realized that your patient, Lee Lewis, who's, you know, in a really precarious place with his advanced diabetes, early stage kidney disease, and his previous heart failure. Did you know that he's not taking metformin and that he doesn't have insulin?" No. How in the world did that happen? I guess I just figured that his endocrinologist handled that. Or I thought the cardiologist took care of that, or whatever it might be. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. I was worried that there might have been some other problem. Are you okay prescribing those really quickly so that just we can close that gap? Absolutely. I'll do it right now. Let me pass you to Ben at the front desk, and he'll send those over to Mr. Lewis's pharmacy. The pharmacist then will call the patient, say, "Hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so. I just got off the phone with Dr. Smith, your primary care doctor or your cardiologist. It looks like you're missing a couple of really important drugs to save your life. They've just been prescribed. It was just a small oversight. They've been sent over to your pharmacy. Please call me back so I can talk through this with you. Thanks so much." We're seeing that, shockingly, or maybe not so much, about 60 to 70% of patients are calling back in.
Hmm.
Previously, in a care management program, I've never seen above a 3 or 4% engagement rate, but they're getting well above 60%.
Wow.
One of my groups said something funny. He said, "Actually, Lee, the shocking piece there is that 3 in 10 people hear that message and say, 'Nah, I'm good. No thanks,' and don't bother calling back." But when this protocol has been tested with Kaiser Permanente and with Blue Cross of Louisiana and others, anytime it's been published, the ROI is north of 50 to 1, 50. And they've seen over $20,000 in savings per patient by reducing those onset heart attacks and strokes.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I only
and
made it
Daryl-
through 3, Daryl, and I know we're way over time.
You know
Yeah.
what? If you've got the time, I would love to keep going, but if you've got to go, I'll certainly understand. But we'll keep recording if you've got the time.
Go ahead, Heidi.
No, Lee, I've got the time, so you just want to be respectful. But if you're willing to continue, that's fine, Daryl.
Well, in Laguna, you shared on the last call quite a bit about Laguna, which is that hospital readmission. But there's Lyra, there's Access Hope. If I understand that there's a dialysis program, there's Carrot.
Let's talk that one real quick. So, dialysis program. So, kidney disease, 3 major issues with kidney disease and end-stage renal disease. One is that we're going to in-center dialysis over 90% of the time. In the rest of the world, only 10% of people go in-center dialysis. Everyone else does it at home. The reasons behind that are the same as anything else. It's that the incentives are aligned to keep people in center.
Right.
Second problem is that we aren't taking advantage of the laws, which enable us as a gift to only pay up to the Medicare allowed amount after someone's been on dialysis about 3 months. We don't have to pay 5 or 6 or 7x Medicare. The third, but very few employers are taking advantage of that. The third problem is that people aren't getting transplants. If you're rich and you're white, you're getting a transplant. If you're neither of those, your likelihood of getting a transplant is very low. And if you don't get a transplant, your life expectancy is 3 to 5 years. If you do, if people who've been out on kidneys and had 1, maybe even 2 kidney transplants have lived 20 plus years. So why in the world is it that we're not just getting everyone a kidney transplant, and until we succeed, we're getting them dialysis at home like the rest of the world, letting them keep their regular lives? That's the intent of this program is one, we're going to cap your dialysis benefit so that you can take advantage of the law that makes it so you don't have to pay above Medicare rate. Two, we're going to work with everybody who's late stage kidney disease and do our best to prevent their progress so they don't advance to dialysis. But if they do, they would be set up to do it at home. And then three, we're going to get people transplants. Here's a fun fact. There are thousands of people who die every month who are on a transplant wait list, can't get a kidney, right? We all heard
Right.
stats like that. Here's another fun fact. They also throw away 5,000 good kidneys a year.
What?
Yep. Yep. What on earth is going on?
Yeah. Sounds like a black
So-
market issue.
It is, imagine this. We've all gone through airport security. If you're like me and you go to the airport a fair amount, you play a little game where the person at TSA checks your ID and you take 1 or 2 steps forward and then you pause. And you all know what you're doing in the pause. You're looking at the 4 different lines and figuring out which one is fastest before you commit. Anyone else played that game before?
Yeah.
I play that game every time.
Yeah.
Because if I'm just looking at my phone and I just take another step forward and plant where I'm sitting, I'm probably in the longest line. But if I look up, pause a moment and check out the 3 lines or 4 lines, one of them has 6 kids and a poor, dear, sweet saint of a woman trying to get them through, and they're not moving quickly, and that's okay. We want to give them lots of space and time. Another one might have a whole lot of people with too much luggage, and another one might have 3 business guys with laptops. You know which one I'm getting in as I beeline for that line because I know I'm going to get through quickly. So guess what? That's kidney disease in America. In Dallas, Fort Worth, if I go to my local dialysis center and they say, hey, Lee, we're going to get you on the wait list for a kidney. Okay. So where do I do something like that? Well, I'll tell you, you call over to the nearest hospital and you ask them about getting a kidney transplant. And they say, okay, great. We're excited to get you that transplant. We do have a wait list right now. Unfortunately, the wait list is about 4 or 5 years. So let's at least get you on that wait list and we'll get you on the wait list and you'll be in a good spot and we'll let you know as we get closer. But God bless, live healthy, stay on your dialysis therapy and hopefully we'll be okay. Guess what? 41 minutes south of me, there is another hospital and they've got a 15-month wait list. And guess what? If I go to Amarillo, there's a hospital with a 4-month wait list. I just have to switch my line. And guess what all the rich white guys do? They find the hospital with the shortest wait list from 1,000 different lines. They get on an airplane, and a month later, they're back to work with their new kidney. But if I don't know about this phenomenon and I live in a local town, oh, and by the way, the person referring me to the hospital owns the dialysis center, nobody's educating me on anything.
Yep.
And I don't have the option. The other thing is I maybe don't need a kidney from Usain Bolt. I could use a regular guy kidney. It's better than nothing. It's better than dialysis.
Yeah.
Anything is better than dialysis. But many kidney centers at the upper extreme that do have a lot more kidneys coming through, that do have wealthier clientele, they're nervous about giving a kidney that isn't perfect to the executive who just flew in. And that's where we lose kidneys, where places are concerned that it may not be a 99th percentile kidney, and they're worried about the risk or worried about this, that, or the other, and don't use it. Well, that kidney would be perfect for somebody who is otherwise just on dialysis, waiting for many years. The other thing too is if they get a kidney and maybe it lasts for 7 years, which is double their current life expectancy, they can still get another kidney. It's okay. If one of them wears out, you can get a new kidney. That is okay. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that.
And so does the dialysis program actually help to identify how long each line is? Or is this something that's put on the individual or the navigator?
Good question. The dialysis program, this is a bit of a fib. It's actually more than one solution is involved in that. The pricing solution is handled through the TPA. The clinical solution that's helping to get people prepped for home dialysis or move them to home dialysis, that's handled by a separate vendor that's clinically minded. And then the transplant vendor is all about finding short lines and getting you a fast pass.
Gotcha.
It's actually 3 vendors in one.
Are you able to share the names of the vendors?
Sure. Well, the TPA is doing the first one.
Right. That's
The
SNS.
transplant that
SNS,
helps
yeah.
you get SNS, that's right. Yeah, exactly. That wasn't very helpfully. Yes, SNS is the TPA. The transplant vendor is Rejuvenate, and the clinical vendor is Dialysis IQ. All of them only
Nice.
work with large employers.
Right.
SNS doesn't, but the other two. But by building this in, well, what do we pay for this? You don't pay anything.
Yeah. They only get paid
Most
if they.
small employers, yes, that's right. You only get paid if you service somebody. Most small employers don't have somebody on dialysis more than once or twice a decade.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Awesome. Awesome program. Do you want to go in and talk about any of the other ones? Like Carrot or
Let's do
and I noticed
one.
on the website that you have an imaging network, but it doesn't say who that imaging network is. Do you have a name of the imaging network?
So there's 2 that we are working with. That part is still going live. There's Green Imaging, who's well regarded and well known. And as a backstop, there's another one called Medmo that performs a similar function, has a broad backup network.
Gotcha. Okay.
And those are great. Effectively is that when we have a physician who orders imaging, the imaging goes back to a radiologist somewhere, and that person reads the file, annotates it, and sends it back to the doctor. The problem is that in some cases, it's a very nuanced diagnosis. And if it goes to a generalist radiologist, because you don't know who it's going to, they
Right.
may not pick up on some of the nuances there, and you get a bad diagnosis. This happens all the time.
Right.
The imaging network, very simply, if you have a cancer image, it goes to a cancer specializing radiologist. If you have an orthopedic image, it can go to someone who specializes in orthopedics. And the same for cardiac and neuro. And by doing that and controlling for unit costs, we get 30% or more on savings on your radiology
Nice.
with better outcomes, better diagnostics.
Do you want to talk about Carrot?
Yep,
Or
Carrie's the last one.
IMC or Vivio?
So we'll wrap up on Carrot and then leave the rest for other scenarios. This one's fascinating. So today, if you have people on your health plan, people are having babies later in life. That results in a couple of things. One is you have more babies who are born preemie. So you have higher risk pregnancies. You have more preemie babies that are going to be spending time in the NICU. You are going to have more babies who are twins and triplets, because if you're having babies later, you're probably going to be using fertility therapies. And fertility therapies are going to oftentimes involve more than one embryo transfer.
Right.
In fact, if people are paying cash, if it's not covered by your employer, and you're walking in there with potentially your life savings over multiple years, and you're paying $22,000 or $28,000 cash, you're telling that doctor, do everything you can to help us start a family.
Yep.
And they're going to pursue the most aggressive therapy. The most aggressive therapy is called multi-embryo transfer. It's where they create embryos, viable embryos, and they transfer all of them at once. It's a more of a scattergun approach. It's a little more aggressive, and it results in a success rate of 60%. And about a third of the time will result in twins or more.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing the math on that, that's 1 in 5 will end up with twins or triplets. And those are very high risk twins. And your average expense there exceeds $250,000 and up. So what do we do with fertility? Fertility actually doesn't generate a huge ROI. It can, but it's hard to prove if it does. But it almost certainly is better than break even. And there it goes. The switched over to the email there. The opportunity here is we just enable people to have best practice. And by so doing, best practice is to transfer one extremely viable embryo, not multiples. And the success rate is 59% versus 60%, almost identical, except the chance of getting twins or triplets is 2 or 3%, not 20.
Gotcha.
And that's where you can offer a premium fertility benefit. Only for people who use it do you pay. And it almost certainly is better than free for the employer, because if you save on one set of twins or triplets, it will pay for dozens of full fertility therapies that are best practice that are available for those families, because you are able to avoid just one of those. And that's how we can offer fertility as a super lux, super premium benefit. No PMPM. If people need to use it, they can. And it's probably able to be offered to them for free or better than free.
Nice.
Yeah,
Pretty
and
cool.
what's nice, Daryl, is that you have kind of a concierge level navigator that supports that as well. That
Which
is
is-
That's
specific
right.
for that.
Which is critical for a family that's trying to, create a family.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of specialty network like UberDoc in your Theralta, where
If
specialists
it
can be
is-
accessed?
Yes. So we're still working on downstream specialist network. The idea there is there's so many specialists. There's at least 17 different specialties where we have
Right.
wide variability in outcomes, that to do 17 different direct contracts in every city and town would be a lot. So instead we can use the network we already have, and we can simply refer better into that network. And that's the process we're focusing right now on,
And that's what
bringing
Right
about
Way does.
anchored in primary care. That's right.
So Right Way is helping to identify within
Yeah.
your current network who are the best specialists at the best price.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you've been amazing. And the fact that you've been willing to go over almost a half an hour is even more amazing. But thank you for being
No.
willing to do that. So we have this on recording and we can share it, because
Absolutely.
I think the tools, every one of them, or as you call them, toys, are amazing. And to be able to bring this to the mid-market is incredible. So again, just kudos to all of you for all the work you put in place. My hope is we just get the word out and let people take advantage of this amazing solution.
Well, Daryl, thank
No,
you.
well, that's
And
nice
thank
of
you
you to
for your
say.
support.
Well,
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Heidi.
we'll stay in touch.
and
Again, thanks
everyone
for everybody
here.
that stayed on the line. Anybody have a final question they really wanted to ask before we close up?
We'll send you the RFPs.
Awesome.
Hey, sounds
Yeah.
great. The link's there, and it's ready to go.
And I
So,
sent that link out to everybody, so everybody should have that. So
sounds good.
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Have
Daryl.
a good
Thanks,
one.
Steve. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Take care.